Sometimes when you collect or play with action figures, you need a figure that's going to fit on your shelf or fit in your pocket to bring it around with you during the day, or fit inside of a vehicle or a playset. And sometimes you need figures that are ridiculously huge because they're gigantic. And that's where JAKKS Big Figs come in. So my name is Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I'm the host here on the Spectre Creative Channel, and I've been in the toy industry for a little over 25 years. I started my career at Mattel, actually as a writer on Hot Wheels, and eventually moved over to the Action Play group, where I worked on things like Matty Collector, DC Universe Classics, which was also made me the default brand manager on the Masters of the Universe Classics line, as well as some great other stuff like Ghostbusters and Voltron. And while I had a fantastic time at Mattel, the opportunity to work on Star Wars toys and move over to another company and explore new ideas was an opportunity I kind of couldn't pass up. After I left Mattel working on the Masters of the Universe Classics and DC Universe Classics line, I was recruited to JAKKS Pacific by my former supervisor at Mattel, who had left for JAKKS a few years earlier. And he thought I would be a great candidate to come on board and help build out their large-scale figures into a bigger line for kids and collectors. And while I loved getting to work on Masters of the Universe, the chance for, well, a better title, more pay, I did have a young family at home, and to work on new brands that I hadn't had a chance to work on previously. A big one of those being Star Wars. I am a huge Star Wars fan, and while I got to work on Star Wars Hot Wheels, I'd never gotten to work on Star Wars action figures before. So that kind of became the final, I guess you could say, well, not nail in the coffin, but I guess beacon to bring me over from Mattel to JAKKS. And a big part of my goal at JAKKS was to build up the Big Figs line into a new scale that would be embraced by kids and collectors alike. So let me talk about kind of the origin of the large-scale figures at JAKKS. So it all started with this Godzilla figure. It was a one-off figure done of the King of All Monsters. It was 40 inches tall when fully assembled and out of the box. I mean, it was huge. And it was also very reasonably priced. If I recall, the original SRP was, I think, $49.99. It did creep up in price as the years went by. But yeah, for $50, you could get a Godzilla that was basically as big as your kid. And it was perfect for play because it could just, destroy your Lego buildings or your Brio railroads, and it was amazing. With the success of this giant figure, JAKKS started looking at what other brands could we do. And while you might call it a loophole, looking at Star Wars, they approached Lucasfilm, and Lucasfilm said that, well, Hasbro has the scale up to 30 inches. So JAKKS said, well, what if we did 31 inches? And there you go. That was the birth of the original giant figures with JAKKS. 31 inches was the first inch above the current contract with Hasbro, and it became the target scale for JAKKS to initiate large-scale figures. These first came out during, I guess you could say, the Clone Wars era of Star Wars, when the animated series was really, really hot and on the air. And it was great because the clones came in lots of different colors, so one mold could make lots of clones. Same thing with the Stormtrooper. JAKKS was very, very good at finding ways to maximize the expensive tooling for these huge figures by adding things like new heads or new color schemes to existing tools, meaning existing figures, to refresh them and make them new for market. Hence you got Luke and Han in Stormtrooper gear. Power Rangers was the next brand that JAKKS looked at and expanded the Big Figs line to that. But it wasn't called Big Figs at this time. And while the license with Lucasfilm started off with the joy of repaintable clones, by the time the entertainment moved on from Clone Wars to Rebels, this wasn't as possible because most of the characters were original characters. They were original, tools. You couldn't just repaint them in limitless colors. But JAKKS really stepped up to the plate and tooled up a ton of characters for the Rebels line and really brought Big Figs to the next level. And continued to do both 31-inch and new 20-inch figures, which also became a focus of the classic trilogy. And this is about when I came onto the brand, right about here, when they just started putting out 20-inch figures for not just Rebels, but the classic trilogy as well. They offered them in singles and 2-packs and multi-packs for different retailers like Costco. And when I saw these in their showroom, my eyes just fell out of my head. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I can help run this line, these giant Star Wars figures. This is amazing. And the first thing I was going to do, or was tasked to do, was to really come up with an overarching brand for these large-scale figures. Previously, they had just been put out as 31-inch and 20-inch large-scale figures of your favorite heroes and villains from different IP. Star Wars, Power Rangers, and we'll get to some superhero figures in a moment. But they were just put out as those characters. You had the logo of the brand, and you had the character's name. So I had worked with the whole team, and we were able to implement the new branding of Big Figs in order to pull all the figures under one banner. Now, getting all the different licensors to hold hands and agree to this wasn't exactly a walk in the park, but we pulled it off. And while the first wave of Episode 7 figures didn't have this branding, by the time we got to the second wave, all the licensors were in agreement, all the boxes were checked off, and we finally got the name Big Figs on the packaging. And this was a huge victory, because now they had a name and people could refer to them. So as new brands were added, like the Power Rangers movie, all of the figures coming out could now proudly go out under the Big Figs brand. It became a way of identifying them to kids, collectors, parents, and it was a way to obtain new brands, because now we could say, hey, we want to have these characters as part of the JAKKS Big Figs brand, not just calling them oversized figures, etc., etc. Especially because there were several different several scales. I can talk today. And that also meant having a reason for being for the different scales. And some of the scales work better for things like movie figures versus comic book. You could get obviously a lot more tooling for a 20-inch figure than a 31-inch. And it was also time to introduce a new scale, the 48-inch figure. These things were huge. They were basically the size of a child. The first figures that came out were for the Ninja Turtle brand, and JAKKS did 2 of them. They did Leo and followed up with Mike, which was basically a head swap and a weapons swap. And if I remember correctly, the shell opened up in the back so you could store the weapons inside. And it was basically like having that character actually in your room. We were able to expand this new scale to Star Wars as well, coming up with a 40-inch Darth Vader figure that had voice. Couldn't use James Earl Jones's voice, but used the Lucasfilm-approved sounds alike. And for Episode 7, the new Stormtrooper also got a cool voice chip, using actual sound from the movie in this case. So, also entering the line, the original, well, not the original superhero, that'd be Superman, but Batman, one of the original more toyetic superheroes. And I was really proud of this one in particular because I came up with the innovative feature. I suggested we do a figure that could project the bat signal on kids' walls. There had never been a Batman figure that had ever done this before. And of course, tooling up Batman was made much easier for the people that held the purse strings, knowing that we could get 2 decos out of it at least. The classic blue and gray, and then the black and gray deco. So the line continued, now with 3 different amazing scales. We had to come up with a way, though, to differentiate all the scales at market and give them a reason for being at, well, not just at market, but for retailers, so they could understand, well, why should I carry 3 different SKUs of large-scale figures as we continue to roll out comic book, movie, and other looks. Another one I really pushed for, by the way, was this Harley Quinn 20-inch figure, noting that Harley Quinn is actually the best-selling DC character, the best, most merchandisable. She actually sells better than Batman. So I was really excited when JAKKS gave permission to tool up a female body and use it for Harley Quinn. I saw this after I left JAKKS. It wasn't made till after I'd left, but it was something I'd worked on before leaving. All right, so back to the 3 scales. So the first 20-inch line, which had the greatest, I guess you could say, variety of characters. This was marketed as the everyday play, noting that kids were playing with a lot of oversized figures like the Titan line. This was meant to kind of be a better economic and larger scale for them. Next up was the 31-inch line. So the reason for being behind this line was the ultimate version of your favorite hero or villain. Yeah, 20 inches were great for everyday play, but if you wanted to upgrade to 31 inches, that was the ultimate version. And then finally, that 48-inch figure, well, that was basically my hero, my roommate, I think was the way I put it, where the figure under the tree would actually look almost life-size to children. Only limited characters were offered in this scale. And I think the most flattering thing about what we were doing was that competitors now had to, well, compete with us. We did talk to Disney about doing the Marvel license, but that was definitely locked up by Hasbro. But because of the success we were having with the DC figures and Star Wars, we noticed one day that suddenly Hasbro started making 20-inch, basically big figs Marvel figures exactly like we were doing with the same articulation and at the same price point. And honestly, this is one of the things where flattery is the best compliment. And because of the success, we were able to acquire new licenses, like Halo is a big one, where the Chief was done at both the 31-inch Ultimate and that 20-inch Everyday Play. I believe we did a Deco plussed up version for GameStop, but kind of everything blends during those years. I don't remember all the details. But I know the video game figures didn't stop there. The World of Warcraft movie was coming, and JAKKS bet heavily on this film and tooled up a really cool 20-inch Duratan that also had a BlizzardCon exclusive version that had added deco, as well as an exclusive larger box with a window so you could see the figure, whether you wanted to take him in or out of the box. It would be a great display piece for collectors. Minions also joined in with the Big Figs family, as did other brands that JAKKS already produced, such as the World of Nintendo brand that had been huge in the kind of pocket-sized figures for shelves and playsets. Well, since we were already doing World of Nintendo figures, it made sense to expand this to the Big Figs line. So Mario became the first candidate for this, and what was great is we could do Mario in multiple decos, Fire Flower, Ice Mario, etc. over the years. Although not all those decos did get released. They did get kind of painted up as prototypes and presented to potential retailers. Lots of Marios I remember seeing. And then, of course, the hero of Hyrule, Link, was also added to the Big Figs line, complete with his sword and shield. Link was also one of those figures that got a plussed-up deco for conventions, in this case San Diego Comic-Con, where we partnered with Entertainment Earth to help bring this figure to collectors in a really cool foil gold box with all the bells and whistles. There were a few figures that fell into the Big Figs category that were sort of an off-scale, shall we say. We did Yoda at 31-inch scale, but that meant he was 20 inches tall, which was, kind of interesting to say the least. But he didn't really fit in with the other figures. Another one that fell into this category was BB-8. So doing him at 31-inch scale meant that he was more or less life-size to the actual robot, which was pretty cool. Call it another kind of loophole in the licensing contract. Because we had access to 31 inches, doing BB-8 in this scale put us in a position to put out a BB-8 that was perfect for everyday play for kids. And I remember really pushing this at all of JAKKS' internal sales shows, saying that this was the BB-8 that kids could really have outdoor adventures or basement adventures with, because it was like my buddy BB-8. And having that 31-inch scale in the contract allowed us to do this. And I do remember seeing at retail a lot of the other Star Wars licensees, specifically Hasbro, because they couldn't do a life-size BB-8, they found, shall we say, creative ways of doing that, such as having playsets that were BB-8 that folded out for 3 3/4 figures. They also did this for the Play School line as well, putting out multiple BB-8 playsets that, when folded up, would more or less be a life-size BB-8, but were really intended to be playsets. This was more of a workaround with the license, but hey, A for effort and good for them for finding a creative solution. Another interesting one was R2-D2 at 31 inches. So again, this was an odd one-off scale, although he did work well with the 31-inch C-3PO. But there was an interesting thing with R2. While he wasn't promoted as having electronics at all, he was just more or less a very large R2-D2 slug figure with some articulation in the heads and the legs. But consumers assumed at this scale they were going to get electronics, even though none were promoted on package. It didn't have a try me, it didn't have anything that said it made lights and sounds. And the number of returns on this figure was astronomical. People basically saying they got it home and it didn't work, saying that the lights and sounds, they couldn't figure out how to get them on. And it wound up getting sold out on clearance. And all of us, in the marketing department were like, but we never said it made lights and sounds. We never promoted this. But hey, the customer is always right. What are you going to say? That was an interesting experience. And then kind of completing my work on the Big Figs line were two really, really cool San Diego Comic-Con Star Wars exclusives I got to work on. So the first being what was called the First Reveal Boba Fett. We really wanted to do a Boba Fett that had never been done before and looked at a lot of the prototype early versions. Specifically, we wanted to find a deco, a look for Boba Fett that had basically, that Hasbro had never done as a figure, because they had done tons of Boba Fett figures over the years and had done quite a few of the prototype ones. And we found a few of the early concepts for Boba Fett that had never been done as a figure. We presented them to Lucasfilm, and they were great partners on this. And kind of the compromise that was generated from our meeting was that we should focus on the debut Boba Fett from the parade that he was in I think it was 1978-79 in Marin County, where Lucas was headquartered. Boba Fett marched with Darth Vader, and the deco, or rather the colors of his outfit, were changed a bit for the movie. They were more colorful. He had the details on the helmet. I don't know if they were the eyes or horns. What they are, you can see it here in this image on his helmet. And in general, his outfit had a lot more color to it than was going to wind up in Empire Strikes Back on screen. This was actually the deco that the original toy was based on, which is interesting, although they lost that helmet deco that had the eyes or the horns painted on. But it is interesting to note that that's why the Kenner figure looks the way it does and does not look like the movie. So we got full permission to basically do this figure to a T, and I was so proud of this because it was so cool to work on a Boba Fett that had never been done. Never as a toy before. There were some non-articulated, shall we say, slug or super deformed figures of the slug, but it had never been an action figure, a full action figure, and I was really, really proud of getting to do that. The second Comic-Con figure that we did that year was a hologram Boba Fett. Look at who's on screen, Scott. A hologram Darth Vader. This was a cool figure for a couple reasons. One, it was an existing tool we had, and obviously hologram Darth Vader action figures, much like Boba Fett figures, had been done, and by multiple companies. So this wasn't going to be as revolutionary as the Boba Fett figure, being able to say this was the first time the deco was ever done as a figure. But in this case, because we had Darth Vader as a 20-inch figure, we were able to kind of spin it that this was more of a prop replica. It was the same size as Darth Vader's hologram in the AT-AT in Empire Strikes Back. I don't know the actual measurements of the hologram, but, more or less it kind of worked. So you could basically put this figure on your desk, and it was like talking to the hologram of Darth Vader. Or you could keep it in the package and it had a great light-up feature that really brought the figure to life and made it look like an active talking hologram. Definitely one of the few figures I've kept in package over the years, because this feature and the toy really worked hand in hand, and it just looked so great lit up. So after that, the Big Figs line started to kind of peter out a little bit, and it was mostly due to cost. The figures, when they first came out 10 years earlier, cost for plastic was much less, and it was easy to do a 31-inch figure. As the line progressed, we looked at other solutions like doing very, very collector-friendly figures with enhanced deco and cloth outfits, finding ways to plus them up with window boxes and all sorts of other kind of bells and whistles aimed more at the adult collector and less at the casual kid. But it just got more and more expensive to do these figures. They started off as a very inexpensive solution to giving a lot for your money. You were getting a lot of value for very little. And by the end, the cost of plastic and the cost of production kind of caught up to where the Big Figs were, and the line, more or less kind of just melted away. It definitely had a heyday, and it definitely brought a lot of kids a lot of joy. But in the end, it just kind of ran out of gas. Not in like a bad way. and it didn't, fail in any way at all. It was a great line. Just some lines, can't go on forever. And eventually you kind of need to say, hey, let's move on to the next big thing. I will say my time at JAKKS was a wild ride, and I had a great time, especially getting to work on Star Wars, which was a main big reason I wanted to come over to JAKKS with the offer after my time at Mattel. I loved Star Wars, and getting to actually work on Star Wars action figures was a huge personal thrill. And I'm glad JAKKS gave me the chance to do that. Big Figs was a cool line. It always will be, and I hope for the kids and collectors that had it, they really treasure the memories playing with these giant, oversized toys. If you like this video, please do give it a subscription and a like. It helps tell YouTube to share it with more people. And that's kind of the whole point of this channel, sharing toy love and knowledge. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.